right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Of course, you know who this is, Alexis Brooks, coming to you right now. Coming to you, so excited, always excited when I have friends on. Today is no exception. We have got back who I affectionately refer to as the dynamic duo of Synchronicity, Rob and Trish MacGregor, coming to us in the same house, but I think in separate rooms, right? We're getting really sophisticated here. Getting really sophisticated. Welcome back. Rob, I got to tell you before we get started, you know, as I was getting dressed, I was watching a show that you and I did about 3 years ago on your book, Tulpas.
Oh, really? Okay.
And it's still, I think I'm going to link that for everyone. That is the topic is fascinating and the way you tackled it and our conversation was fascinating. So thank you for that. I got a chance to revisit that. I think you have the same hat on too. One of your favorite, your lucky hat, maybe. Well, today, you guys, we're going to be talking about their latest and greatest mind-blowing synchronicities, the latest science stories and research. You have been covering the topic, among many other things, of course, of synchronicity for a long, long time. What was the impetus why are you so fascinated with the subject of synchronicity? Either one of you can answer.
I think it just ties things together. You know, you have an experience and you think, my God, where did this come from? And then you start seeing things that are connected to it, or you meet people that are connected to it. You know, I mean, for me, this really started when I was 18 and somebody handed me a copy of the I Ching. And it was the Wilhelm edition, to which Jung wrote the introduction where he introduced synchronicity. I read that thing and I thought, my God, this explains everything. So that's what started.
Do you find that writing about synchronicity and or reading about synchronicity can trigger more?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. It does. You're in that mindset and you recognize it a lot easier. And I think things come together a lot easier when you're more aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people go through their lives without ever having one or two synchronicities. I talked to somebody who was very involved in the UFO field, and he was very excited. He said, "I had one synchronicity in my life," and he explained it in great detail, and it made no sense to me, but it was important to him.
Yeah. I'm going to ask, I don't know who has their big beep on. I just got a big beep that just...
Yeah, I don't know. How do I shut it off on my computer?
Oh, dear. Well, you know what? You guys are popular, so I know this thing is going to be going off for a good bit. So maybe we can have Rob talk for a bit while Trish figures out how to turn off the beep. Because you know what's so funny? I have to digress for a minute. We are so entrained with the beeps and all the signals from our devices. Have you ever heard something on TV, a text beep, and you find yourself looking at your own phone?
Right, yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. We need everyone to focus on this conversation. So, Trish, I'm going to let you figure out how to turn that off, and I'll continue with Rob. Rob, now you were kind of the what shall I say, co-star in this endeavor with this book, Mind Blowing Synchronicities.
Yeah, this is really Trish's book, and I provided a few stories, just synchronicities that happened along the way while she was writing for the most part, and then I edited the book for her. So yeah, this is really Trish's book. You know, you asked a question about synchronicity, right, from the top to Trish, and what always comes to my mind is that when I met Trish, one of the first things she said to me was, "Do you know what synchronicity is?" You know, which is, I was working as a reporter and I was interviewing her for a story I was doing related to the Cuban refugees coming into Florida during the Mario boat lift. Because she was involved with that and teaching English as a second language. And after the interview, she just said to me, "Do you know what synchronicity is?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I've heard of it." And at that point, I was very interested in metaphysical things, the paranormal, and but I always thought of synchronicity as sort of a lower level type of paranormal phenomena. But then as I, got more into it and being around Trish especially, I realized it's more like the umbrella of all paranormal experiences.
I
Well, it
agree. Well,
all of
go
it,
ahead, Trish.
it
I'm sorry.
encompasses paranormal, it encompasses so much. So I think it is,
Telepathy,
yeah,
cognition,
Yeah. Well, you actually wrote about the 7 categories that you believe to be sort of the top tiers of what synchronicity is about, including the knowing, the heart, the theory, the creative, the clusters, the trickster, and the global. Talk about that a little bit. How did you come to organize them in those categories?
it was just in 2009 we started a blog on synchronicity, and as we started getting stories, we started looking at the types of stories and what they concerned, and I think that's how that those
Yeah. And
categories. There were
it,
actually more, but our editor at the time said, no, we have to keep it to 7 because she liked the alliteration.
because it sounds good. 7 secrets.
But there were
Well, 7 is a powerful
actually
number.
Yeah.
what?
7 is a powerful number. 7 chakras,
Yeah,
7 days of the week.
Alliteration as well. 7
yeah.
secrets of synchronicity. All the
Uh-huh.
S's.
And when
Wow.
I pointed out to Paula, to the editor, I said, well, we've got others. And she goes, we'll do a part 2 and talk about the others. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
We
Well, I think
solved.
these are actually quite important. The knowing, the heart, the theory, interesting, and the creative. I want to get into the creative, but I want to read a quote from the book. I believe this is from the back of the book that kind of struck me, and I thought that would spawn interesting conversation. You say, synchronicity often happens when your life is in transition, perhaps even chaotic. During intensely emotional periods, you suddenly feel connected to something larger than yourself and your immediate world. It can act as confirmation, guidance, or warning. It can be a trickster, but it's always an ally. Why do you think that it's often during these times, guys, that synchronicity happens, particularly during intense emotional times? And I can tell you a story about that happening to me, but why is that?
I think you're more attuned to it. You need something. You want to see evidence that the universe we live in is actually larger than we think it is. Like when my sister died, I had talked to you right after that. And it was such a shock that I thought, okay, I need to remember that these are the times when synchronicities flourish. And they did, and
Mhm.
that was comforting in a way. I mean, it didn't bring her back, but at least it
Yeah.
it it was comforting.
I think also you're more open. Your feelings are more intense and open during those kind of experiences, good or bad, and that allows these synchronicities to appear more, and that you're more aware of them.
Mhm.
Come
I
to
Do
mean,
you.
you're
you
also able
could
to interpret them.
Right. I wonder, just kind of taking it maybe even a little deeper, could there be a quantum effect that's taking place? I mean, let's think about it when you're in, let's just isolate the intensely emotional periods. When you're in an emotional state that is intense, whether it's joy or grief, uh, something about our own energetic field maybe intensifies that maybe, and I don't want to get too scientific because I'm not scientific, but could it be that the frequency that we're emitting is kind of commingling with that metaphysical aspect that could bring about these synchronicities? I just feel like there might be something even more formulaic going on there.
Well, I think synchronicity is part of the quantum world. If
Hmm.
you read about what some of the early physicists and people like Jung, I mean, you read what Jung, some of the things that happened to him that were synchronistic, they're mind blowing.
Hmm.
And okay, it's got to be something that connects inside you, the outside. It's definitely quantum.
Hmm. No question about it. It's very It's one of those mysteries that I think Richard Feynman says it does no harm to the mystery to know a little bit about it. So that's what we're trying to do. It's just, it's a stunner. And I think it's just a reminder of how not just mysterious, but how on purpose God, universe, source is, and us really. So let's get into, I want to, obviously we talk so much about the UFO phenomenon on this Higher Journeys channel. Obviously I want to get into it here, and you do have a chapter. I can't remember the name of the chapter. You guys can remind me where you go into. Say
Those
again.
Those dudes from elsewhere.
Those dudes from elsewhere. How could I forget something like that? Those dudes and dudettes.
Yes,
I would
and you get-
imagine from elsewhere. You talk about synchronicity. We talk about commingling in certain scenarios. UFO encounters could be one, other paranormal encounters another. Let's dive in to why that may be. Why would high strangeness be a factor in perhaps these synchronicities? Either one of you.
I mean, the whole UFO field is so strange and so unknown that to me it seems a natural place for synchronicities to occur. Okay, so back in, I guess it was during COVID, I got an email from this woman, Melissa, who used to live in our neighborhood. She lives in New York now. And at the time that she lived in our neighborhood, she used to babysit Megan. She's about probably 17 years older than Megan. But anyway, she said she'd been to a family reunion, and her cousin, Joe Killian, had an encounter that he told her about, and she didn't know how to talk to him about it, so she put him in touch with us. So it happened to him on January 26, 2019, and he was outside a restaurant in Croton Falls, New York, and it's pitch black, hazy night, and he saw that was a Shell station across the street that offered some illumination. So I saw these two figures that were about 10 feet away from him. At first, he thought they were men, and the taller one stood about 6'4", I think. Was walking away from him toward the gas station at a really swift clip, and nobody was around. There was no traffic on the road. So he says, I thought these two guys were normal people, and I didn't record it on my phone since he was holding a bag of recyclable bottles in his left hand and his car keys in his right hand. So his first thought was that it was one person, but now he believes there were actually two separate people, or what he thought were people. But nothing looked out of the ordinary or weird. Anyway, he came alongside the taller one and called out to him, "Hey man, where are you going?" And the guy never acknowledged him, never said anything, never looked at him, nothing. And then Joe sees the sky above this guy just totally open up. It was like it opened up into he describes it as being, well, what happened was he saw the man's leg.
It's like a vortex.
Yeah, it was like a vortex opened up. And it appeared at his left, and this guy's disembodied leg was pulled up into the slit in the sky, the vortex, whatever. Then his body parts were blown apart. And so Joe's standing there seeing all this, just his mind is just blown. And then he sees these electric blue streaks of light that appeared. Everything then turned black and gray, and the guy was gone. So Joe knew he had experienced something unusual, to say the least. And also, he never figured out what happened to the second guy. He thought maybe it was an optical illusion that there was a second being.
Yeah, we've tried that. Yeah, we've tried that story on a number of different people who are, experts or involved in UFO research, and they've never heard of anything like that at all. With somebody's body being blown apart and sucked up into the void.
And I mean, he was so freaked out by this. He went to a priest, he went to a psychologist, he consulted a lot of experts. And the priest told him to go to confession or some weird nonsense thing. And the psychiatrist, I think, thought he was a little nutty. So anyway, he stopped saying him. So then he went to that, I guess it was a workshop you held with Whitley. So he attended that, and that helped him. And also these podcasts I've been sending him about UFOs and stuff, because I think it helps people who have this experience like Joe did. It helps to know you're not by yourself.
Absolutely.
You're not alone. Other people have experienced this kind of stuff. It may not be just like yours, but it's the same type of weirdness.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he was greatly helped by that workshop you held with Whitley.
I'm so glad. I have to say, so there's a synchronicity right there, right? We're going to get into some of the synchronicities that I have had just by virtue of reading your book. We'll call this number one. As I'm reading this story of Joe Killian and how intense this was, and at the end you mentioned that one of the things that had helped him is he had attended a workshop with Whitley. The first thing that came to mind is, was it my workshop with Whitley? And lo and behold, because here's the deal, we'll talk offline. I'd love to get a hold of him or see him again, as it were. I'll probably remember. I don't think he told the story in our workshop, but that's intense.
No, he didn't.
That's intense. Wow. How is he doing now? I know that this is very difficult.
I mean, here it is, 4 or 5 years later, and it's still a trauma for him. Yeah. Because it totally tore apart his worldview. And his belief system. When you're going along, he used to be a PE teacher, and then this very strange thing happens at random one night, and he's kind of like, okay, what do I do now?
What do I do now? Oh, the whole worldview. Speaking of blowing to pieces, and by the way, I have never, you haven't, and nor have I heard of that sort of a witnessing something like that. Ever. It's not to say that it's not happened, but my God, that's got to be one of the most bizarre.
Well, he also drew two, he actually painted them in the book. They didn't come out in color, but he did 2 images of what he had seen. And one of them is of this being. And it does look very human, So I don't know.
Yeah.
And he says some people have told him that he should feel blessed about seeing this. And he says, no blessings here. It's 5 years later and I'm still freaked out.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, and maybe this is an opportunity for a little bit of a plug on the commentary that I just did, where we talk about something similar. We talked about other things, but I focused on a 1994 episode of Oprah, of all people, who covered the abduction phenomenon along with the now late John Mack. And something similar came out in the conversation when she was questioning an experiencer named Randy, who was very clear in that this was a traumatizing event and that he didn't want to believe it. And I quote, that's what he said. And she said, well, I don't know. I wouldn't mind it happening to me. And I thought that was a bit insensitive, to be frank with you, and within the context of what they were talking about. No, well, many of these experiencers, for the more hellish experiences, they don't want any part of it. And many of them don't want to even talk about it. So,
well, they're traumatized,
Oh yeah. Who well, I'm not going to say who wouldn't be, because there are some people that have welcomed these experiences and that are more in sync with them, shall we say. By the way, we're going to move on to some other things, but I want to let everyone know we are going to go to the after show and really dive deep into the whole alignment of synchronicity and UFO encounters, because I think there's a lot to go into there. So just a little plug for the after show. Let's go on to something else. I want to talk about hurricanes. I want to talk about hurricanes, and it's not a laughing matter. Obviously, we're right on the heels of and still in the midst of this aftermath of Helene that really has wreaked havoc on actually my area. We're lucky that our little area here in South Carolina did not get affected as much as some others in the Carolinas. I would call that yet another somewhat eerie synchronicity, guys, because it was at the point where I was reading this part of the book of yours where you talk about a synchronicity having to do with a novel. I want to have you explain that, and Hurricane Andrew. And I have to just say, do you realize how many times we rescheduled this interview happening right now? And the timing of our having it right on the heels of Helene, I would say, would qualify as a synchronicity,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
My God. It's crazy. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, one of the 7 secrets that we wrote about, the 7 secrets of synchronicity, which was our first book on synchronicity, was about creativity. And a lot of times through creativity, we tap into the future. I think we tap into precognition. And that's what happened to me in 1992. This is a strange story. Okay, August 14th, 1992, I emailed, actually snail mailed my novel Storm Surge off to my editor at Hyperion. That same day, a wave moved off the coast of Africa, and 2 days later, it became a hurricane. One of the most powerful on record. It was Hurricane Andrew, with winds at some point were in excess of 200 miles an hour. On August 24th, it slammed into Homestead, Florida as a Cat 5 and devastated it. Okay, in Storm Surge, the hurricane was also a Cat 5. It began with an A name. It was called Alfonso instead of Andrew. And the real storm and the fictive storm both had tightly impacted eyes. I think at one point they said that Helene's eye was 40 miles across, while Andrew's was 10. And so was the one in my book. And when it's that tightly compacted, it's particularly strong. And also, just like Andrew, my fictive hurricane hit a very small area in Florida. So the similarities, as they started happening, really freaked me out. And just the fact that I mailed my editor the book on the same day that Andrew, as a wave, moved off the coast of Africa, freaked me out completely. So I vowed from that time on not to do any books on hurricanes. I was afraid to. But I did. In 2005, I think it was, I did a book called Cat 5, Category 5, which was about a Category 5 hurricane that hits my fictional island of Tango Key. It came out It came out the same, I think it was the same month that Katrina hit New Orleans. So all of a sudden, my editor calls me up and she goes, Trish, we're getting all kinds of calls from people who want to talk to you about Category 5. I said, wait a minute, I'm a fiction writer. I'm not a meteorologist, But in my research for the book, I became something of an expert on hurricanes. So I did a bunch of radio shows. After that, but since then, I haven't written anything on hurricanes. I never will again.
Don't ever do it again. You said that before.
I'm afraid to.
Rob, I want to direct this to you. Again, I want to go, let's try to go deeper into this, oh God, this rabbit hole we call the metaphysical world. I've always been kind of perplexed over the difference or the similarities between synchronicity and precognition. Does one beget the other? Are they aspects of the same thing? It seems like through synchronicity, precognition can come. And it seems like in this case, this is beyond synchronicity. This, to me, was a precog that came through the creative channel for you, Trish. But I want Rob to comment on this. Give me your deep dive thoughts on what the heck may be going on here when you're literally writing the future.
Yeah, this is something that happens a lot in fiction writing, that you pick up things that are going to happen. There's all kinds of historical stories of writers like the Titanic, and the guy who wrote, his last name is Roberts, and then he wrote about the Titan, a ship, brand new ship that goes into the North Africa, hits a iceberg and sinks. Very similar, with a very similar
same length of the boat, same number of people, same number of lifeboats.
Yeah, very close. And so
and he wrote that 40 years before Titanic, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And with Edgar Allan Poe and his story about what was the name of the character, Trish?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I remember that guy's name.
Yeah.
Oh, it was something weird.
Yeah. Anyhow, he wrote a story about a ship sinking and 4 survivors, and one of them was a 16-year-old cabin boy. And they're out there drifting along for days and weeks and starving, and they decide they're going to eat one of them, and they decide they're going to eat the cabin boy. And this actually happened 40 years later, and with a cabin boy with four survivors, and the cabin boy had the same name as the character in the Poe story,
Yeah.
and I can't think of the name, unfortunately.
That's stunning. Well,
Yeah.
I think there was another book that you guys did. Maybe you've done so many where you
Well,
really
Sensing
went.
the Future. Yeah,
Yes,
we had a lot of
Sensing
those.
the Future.
That was
Another.
definitely on Precognition.
Yeah, yeah. You had so many. Just you could. You know what they say. You couldn't make this stuff up. You couldn't make it up.
That's for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
look. Speaking of, I'm sorry. I'm talking a lot. Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to just say is that, you asked about the difference between the synchronicity or paranormal or clairvoyance, and it's really all the same. It's all synchronicity, and whether it's you see it as precognition, you think of a friend who you haven't heard from for maybe years, somebody from college or whatever, and suddenly that person sends you a text message or an email, a Facebook request. And so, what was that? Was that precognition? Was it
Or
telepathy? And
Right.
it was definitely synchronicity, So it could be all three. It's part of our
but there are definite
intuitive abilities.
But there are definite precognitions that, where you do tune into the future. You see a future event, you feel it.
Yeah.
That doesn't have anything to do with telepathy or
Mhm.
Right.
or telekinesis or anything else. It's precognition.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. I guess you would say, not all synchronicities are not all synchronicity is precognition, but all precognition has a synchronistic factor, or something like that. Yeah.
And,
I
and
definitely.
precognitions are tricky too, because sometimes when they happen, you think, "Am I losing my mind?" I mean, what is this that I just thought of, or that I just wrote, or however it is that it happens? And it seems that a lot of them occur through dreams. That seems to be the most
Absolutely. That's my
common.
thing. That's been
Yeah.
since I was a child. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's stay on the storm thing, because you go into even more. I think there's something in the back of your mind, Trish, where you want to talk about natural disasters, or maybe they're not. I don't know. Let's talk about Whitley and art. Listen, something that I don't think I was aware of, but wait till I got a synchronicity for you, yet another that happened while I was reading this book. So for the audience, the late Art Bell, we miss him so much, co-wrote a book with Whitley Strieber called The Coming Global Superstorm. And that book, that novel, was actually made into a movie called The Day After Tomorrow, starring Dennis Quaid and others. I have to tell you, you're not going to hold on to your headphones, guys. As I'm reading, you're telling the story in the book. Guess what movie I happened upon the night before?
Oh God! Really? That's a
The
good
Day
one.
After Tomorrow. The Day After Tomorrow. But here's the real kicker: I never watch movies right before bed. I'll admit, the Golden Girls. Every night, my husband and I watch Golden Girls before bed because we want to end on a light note for the night. For some reason, I couldn't tune into the Golden Girls, and The Day After Tomorrow popped up, and I watched it. Next day, what do I read?
Hurricane Helene.
Tell us about that. You talk about this in the book. What's that all about? Where's the synchronicity, I guess you could say, in terms of what happened in the writing of the book and the making of the movie?
It's ever since Whitley wrote that book with Bell, I have seen it referenced in so many climatology articles on the internet. And in Day After Tomorrow, this is what happens. And that is happening. In fact, Dolly Saffron, who's an abductee that now has her own show with Preston Dennett, has a podcast. She said to me, it's just like what happened in Day After Tomorrow. That's what is creating all these hurricanes, why they're not following the usual paths, which is true. She says it's the collapse of the Gulf Stream, the collapse of the Atlantic current. Now, I don't know. I'm not a meteorologist, but it does seem, I've lived in Florida long enough and watched hurricanes long enough to see some truth in what she's saying.
Yeah.
But again, she referenced Day After Tomorrow.
Right. Look, that this is a whole other conversation that this is probably not the venue to get into it. There's lots of controversy as to what's really causing the
Right.
climate change. Clearly, the climate is changing. Could it be a technology that's being employed? Could it be a technology that maybe is trying to prevent some of the catastrophic things that they see coming? I don't know. That's another story for another time. But again, in terms of the synchronicity, you know, as it relates to all of this, where did you see the synchronicity kind of come together with these two things? Was it because of what Dolly had said, or how many times their book was referenced? Where did the synchronicity
Well,
come from?
it was just another reference to Whitley's book. That was just one of them. And a couple of days earlier, there had been, I was reading some meteorological article where they referenced Whitley's book. And I thought, that's interesting. They're referencing fiction, and saying, okay, but there's enough in this fiction to apply it to real life. It's, again, I think Art and Whitley tuned into the future when they wrote that book.
Could be. There's so many factors going on. We can go on because you cover this aspect of the whole idea of synchronicity in several accounts that you cite in the book. One of them has to do with the Netflix documentary called White Noise. I believe that there's another movie, by the way, years before that had a paranormal twist called White Noise, if I'm not mistaken. But this one in particular had to do with a toxic chemical leak
in Ohio.
in Ohio, and all of us know what happened in 2023 in Ohio. Talk about that a little bit and how you.
I have to find it. Hold on.
Yeah.
I have a hard time keeping all this stuff in my head.
Yeah. Well, I will. This is a fascinating thing. While you're looking for it, Tricia, I'm going to bring up something rather controversial, and I want to have the audience kind of chew on it, or maybe not. But there are a couple of factors that may be going on here when we talk about these things. Synchronicity, quite possibly. Tapping into the future through creative endeavors, I definitely think is something plausible. But there's also something quite controversial that's known as predictive programming. Have you ever, either one of you, ever heard of it?
I've heard of that.
I'm not familiar with that, no.
Yeah. Well, and we're not going to harp on this too long because this isn't the type of show that we're doing today. But it has to do with fiction that's developed by design to psychologically acclimate the public to an event that is planned to happen for the future.
That's interesting.
I don't say that I believe or disbelieve, but there has been a lot of data and some whistleblowers that have come out and said, indeed, this is the case. I can't say this is the case with the Ohio derailment or, for goodness sakes, the book that Whitley and Art wrote, unless they're in on some major intelligence. But
to me, that sounds like a logical, somebody trying to apply a logical reasoning for synchronicity, that, and in itself, it's somewhat suspicious in that, why that in itself would be an odd thing to be able to write this book to prepare for it, and then that it happens. I think it's easier just to consider it a synchronicity rather than some deep conspiracy.
Deep state conspiracy.
Yeah. Well, again, there's some scholars that have gone into deep detail and some individuals that have said to have been in on it. So again, I don't, I haven't really studied it that much, but I think what you're saying is acceptable as well, Rob, because, everyone has different views. And I think there may be different applications for different things. The idea of intuition or precognition coming through the creative channel really does resonate with me. So I do think we're dealing with some aspect of that, at least in some cases. So there's definitely a case for that. Yeah.
I can't find the story.
Don't worry. That's
okay.
fine.
Anyway, I need to make better notes.
No worries.
It's just like all the movies and books that have come out that are dystopian about the future that, is very bleak. And are these books preparing us for what's coming? But I think it's more of a natural thing that people are tuning into rather than somebody said, okay, why don't you write this book and we'll prepare people for, so I don't think that's what's happening. I think it's just, a deeper unconscious level that so much is about dystopian stories, Walking
I found
Dead
it.
and okay.
I found
it could
White
be a
Noise.
little bit of both. Okay, she's determined to read White Noise too, so
Okay.
take it away, Trish. Go ahead.
All right, this movie had a world premiere at the 79th Venice International Festival, Film Festival on August 31st, 2022. And then it was released into cinemas on November 25th, 2022. And then in December 30th, 2022, Netflix picked it up. Okay, it's based on Don DeLillo's 1985 novel, which won the National Book Award. Okay, according to Salon, after Noah Baumbach adapted and directed a film version of White Noise, starring his partner Greta Gerwig and Adam Driver, a freight train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed in rural Ohio. The story was still developing at the time I wrote this, and the environmental impact may not be fully known for years. Okay, but the synchronicity falls under the fourth secret in our book, The Creative, because both the novel and the movie are set in Ohio in the fictional town of Blacksmith. The movie was filmed almost entirely in Ohio. In the film, a tanker truck loaded with toxic flammable material crashes into a passing train because of the truck driver's drunk driving. The train derails in the countryside, the tanker is crushed and releases this viscous substance. The real event involving a train derailment happened February 3rd, 2023 in East Palestine, Ohio, a town near the Pennsylvania border. A Norfolk Southern train with 20 cars containing hazardous materials derailed, caught fire, and created a horrendous cloud of toxic material. In both the film and the real life, residents are ordered to evacuate, then to shelter in place. In real life, the derailed and burned cars contain dangerous chemicals, and I can't even pronounce all these chemicals, but they're carcinogens. And as NPR wrote, people who breathe the chemicals over many years may experience liver damage. Okay. All right, here's another weird facet of the synchronicity. Some of the residents of East Palestine were extras in the movie. Okay, take a look at how many things were similar. And this was a book written in 1985. That's what it was based on. So how did he tune in on something like that?
Right.
All those years, I mean, 85, that's what, 30, 40 years?
40 years, yeah.
Yeah, 40 years.
Going on 40 years. Well, at the time, it would be 40 years when the Ohio derailment happened in 23. Yeah. Wow. Well, again, a big question mark, right? Guys, I'm talking to the audience. Comment below if you have any thoughts on how this might work. And has it happened to you, most importantly? I'd love to hear your stories. I bet Rob and Trish would too, for sure. We're going to wind down on the main show. We're going to go over to the after show. We're going to get more into the UFO synchronicity phenomenon. But I have to hear from each of you on what is the most mind-bending synchronicity you have experienced. I'd like to hear from each of you. Rob, I'm going to have you go first. The most perplexing, mind-bending synchronicity.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. I think probably the one where this guy came to my door and wanted to do our lawn service there. And I said, oh, I just do it myself now. And he said, okay, have a nice day. That weekend, I was doing a lot of windsurfing back in the late 80s. And this is when it happened. I went to one of our local lakes and was windsurfing, a windy day, and I forgot to take my billfold out of my pants. And when I fell off the board, which I often did, out came the billfold to the bottom of the lake. But I didn't know it. I thought it was still in the car, and I just refused to believe that I lost that billfold in the lake. And I told Trish, I'm not going to order a new driver's license or credit card. I just know that I'm going to find it. That billfold is going to come back to me. So about a week goes by, and I get a telephone call, and the man says, is this Rob MacGregor? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, thank God. I thought you might be at the bottom of the lake because I was fishing with a net and came up with your billfold. And I thought your body might be down there as well. And I'm so glad you're alive. And he said, can you come over? We made arrangements that I would come over and get my billfold from him. And I go over, and it's a Sunday, and he's having a big party in his house. And there's like 3 people. He's from India, and there are like 3 people with the same name. And I'm walking around trying to find the one who has my billfold. And finally, I meet him, and I look at him. Oh, you're the lawn guy who came to my house last week. So
that's incredible.
That's beyond synchron. Well, you talk about synchronicity and other things being folded in. I would call that miracle.
Right. And the fact that I had this feeling that is a part of it, a feeling that I'm not, that's coming back to me. And these kind of synchronicities often have that a sense of a higher feeling that is involved. And that's what happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. Trish, what about you? That's amazing, Rob. Wow. Amazing. And I love it. And thank God it had an ending where it was just a billfold under the water.
And it wasn't you at the bottom of the lake.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Trish.
Mine happened in 1988, I think it was. We were traveling with my parents. We went back to Venezuela just to see. We hadn't been back to see what it was like. So Rob and I had gone into the mountains, and we were coming back through Caracas, through Maiquetía. And this was in the days when there was a lot of drug trade between Colombia and Venezuela. So in this room where they had everybody go, there were all these young guys standing around with these machine guns, basically. So the atmosphere was tense, and everybody had to take their bag, whatever it was, and open it up so these guards could see everything. So the guy in front of us was wearing a 3-piece suit, had his little briefcase. And he went up, the guy says, open up your briefcase. And Rob and I are standing behind this guy. So he opens it up, and there's one thing inside. It was a book called Fevered that I had written as Allison Drake. So I couldn't even say, hey, that's my book, because I had no proof that I was Allison Drake. But what's so weird about everything, that Fevered, it really fit the tone of the room then. The atmosphere.
Yeah, it wasn't a situation where you could really talk to the guy about the situation and ask him. He's this tall guy with a 3-piece suit. He looks different than everybody else. I'm thinking this guy is some kind of man in black, because it's such a weird. He's traveling internationally, and we had to have all of our luggage out on this table. So we had, our big bags and the carry-ons. And still he only had a briefcase, and the only thing in it was Trish's book.
I think he was an MIB. I really do.
Yeah, that is a strange.
Well,
and then he
we
went
never
in,
saw him again.
And we never saw him again. He went in ahead of us, and that was very odd.
The plot thickens. Maybe that's what we need to go next door and talk about in the after show. That's could be. It could very well be. What was that book about, Trish?
Fevered, let's see, I think it was the second Tango Key book I wrote. And I think ultimately there were 4, and then I went ahead and started using my regular name rather than.
That was a murder mystery, right?
Yeah, it was a murder mystery.
Yeah.
I don't remember the particulars. Yeah, it was weird. I mean,
I think you need to go find that book and look. Go find that book and look at it and see if there's anything that might give you that little feeling in your tummy. Yeah, I'm not kidding.
There may have been a reference to UFOs. I'll have to go back and look, because I can't remember.
Yeah, it's funny. We write these books, and we, go on to the next book and can't remember a lot of what happened. And so I get since I wrote 7 Indiana Jones novels, I get people coming and asking me about particular scenes or things that why did you write this? Why did you have him losing his hat when in the movie he doesn't lose his hat? And I said, I don't know. Now, I had an earlier version of the script I was working from, I think, with the Last Crusade. And I think he did lose his hat. I can't remember, but people have, they send me the page, a picture of the page, and they circle it and question marks, and it's funny.
Retaining information, particularly once you write a book. And I know when I published my book in 2014 and did the circuit and did a lot of radio interviews, and I would tell them it up front, please don't grill me on some of the intricate details because I may not remember. I can give you the general themes. There's so much to retain. But wow. Yeah. Well, what's next for you guys before we go next round? By the way, a reminder, we are going over to Patreon to get a little bit deeper with the UFO and maybe even other paranormal encounters and how they're intertwined and entangled with synchronicity. But before we do that, first of all, where can people find you and what's next on the horizon for you both?
Well, I'm just finishing a novel called The Unseen, which is another Mir Morales novel. And unfortunately, it starts with South Florida sinking. Maybe I should not have written this book. I don't know.
Are you kidding?
We'll see.
Are you kidding?
No.
Oh dear.
And it's, I thought, oh, why did I do this? So we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, why? This is really, in all seriousness, the crux of the conversation I think we've been having today, guys. And that is, what is the motivation? Where is this coming from? Could we literally be channeling the future, bringing forth? Are we mediums? Is this a mediumistic thing? Very interesting. I think it's scary. Well, it's intense for sure. Yeah. And for the creative types, we didn't really get into that too much. But in terms of, here's one question before we go that I think would be great for the audience to know. If this is happening as much as we think it is, that in other words, the creative process can be a trigger, it seems, for a peek into the future, or maybe even creating the future. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible to consciously use the creative process? Let's say you're writing a book. What if you have a whole idea, an intention as to how you want to live your life or an aspect of your life, and you literally start writing? Well, I mean, it's not like the exercise of journaling, a little bit different than that, but using the real crux of the creative process to push into a future scenario that you desire.
I've thought about that, Alexis, and I think I think it's possible.
Yeah, it's the law of attraction, basically. Yeah. That's part of it. Creating the circumstances, getting the mindset of what you're looking for. And I think it would have to, if you're writing fiction, it'd have to be more than that. But that would be one aspect of it that you could use for achieving that goal. But the things we write about, mostly, we don't want them to happen to us.
Right. So I say switch it up and let's talk about a utopian life on planet Earth, along with perhaps the others, the visitors. Yeah. Oh boy. Listen, always a pleasure to have you two on the show. We're not finished yet. We're going to ask you to stay put because we're going to go. Well, you get to walk next door. I'm going to walk.
Thank you, Alexis.
Always good to do it. Let me sign off with the Journeyers, and I hope to see you over on Patreon. Don't hang up, Trish and Rob. We're going to go next door right now. Thanks, everyone, for watching and listening, as always, to Higher Journeys. We'll talk to you real soon. Take care.